Nervous System Video Part 3 11.3 How does the nervous system process information? There are two types of nervous system actions when we mention about this. A. Reflex actions and B. Voluntary actions. Reflex action is also called the involuntary actions when the immediate response to a specific stimulus without conscious control. When we say conscious control, it refers to the working of the brain. Voluntary actions are the actions that are under conscious control, means that the person understand and realize what is happening at the moment. First, let us look at the voluntary pathway. How does the nervous system process the information under the voluntary pathway? First, the information must be gathered by the receptor, after which is converted into the electrical signal, or we call the nerve impulse. Nerve impulse transmitted by the peripheral nerves, in this case the sensory nerve, to the central nervous system. Brain is involved where it processes the information based on the patterns of the nerve impulse, and it sends the nerve impulse to the effector through the motor neurons, after which the intended action is carried out. Let's look at one animation on the pathway of voluntary actions.
The nervous pathway in a voluntary action. We can use our own will to control our actions. Actions of this type are called voluntary actions. If we want to kick a ball, the association areas of the cerebrum send out nerve impulses. The nerve impulses are transmitted to the interneurons in the motor area of the cerebrum. The motor area sends out nerve impulses, which travel along the motor nerve fibre in the spinal cord. The nerve impulses reach the leg muscles, which are the effectors. The leg muscles contract upon stimulation by the nerve impulses, and the leg kicks upwards. Therefore, we can kick the ball away as
Reflex actions, however, is an immediate response to a specific stimulus without the conscious control, or without the control of the will of the persons. These actions are involuntary and not under the control of the person. It has the shortest pathway of the nerve impulse from the receptor to the effector, is known as the reflex arc. Okay, let's look at one example of reflex actions. What happens when you touch a surface of a hot object? When you touch the surface of the hot object, there's not much time for the person to actually think what is the actions to carry out. In this case, reflex actions or involuntary action is preferred. Initially, the heat stimulates the receptor in the skin. Nerve impulses are then produced and they are transmitted along the sensory neurons to the spinal cord. From here, the receptor stimulated by the heat and the nerve impulses are transmitted along the sensory neurons to the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, the nerve impulses are transmitted to the relay neurons and then to the motor neurons. At the same time, some of the nerve impulses actually also transmit to the brain. Upon receiving the nerve impulse from the relay neurons, the motor neuron transmits the nerve impulse to the effector. From here, the motor neuron transmits the nerve impulse to the effector. The effector muscles contract result in the withdrawal of the hand from the hot object. In this case, the brain is not involved in the reflex actions. Brain only receives the nerve impulse from the relay neurons after the effector receives them. It can, however, be involved in the responses that take place after the reflex actions. For example, putting one hand under the running water to cool one of the hand down. Pain is also perceived by the brain after the reflex action has taken place. The withdrawal of the hand from the hot objects was involuntary and not under the control of the person's will. Let's look at the whole process of the reflex actions again. The pathway, we also call it as the reflex arc. Reflex arc is the shorter pathway which the nerve impulses actually transfer from the receptor to the effector in the reflex actions. In this case, from the sensory neurons to the relay neurons, in the spinal cord directly to the effectors, directly to the motor neurons and to the effector, without going through the brain. A reflex arc consists of a receptor or sense organ, a sensory neurons, relay neurons, motor neurons, and an effector. Let's look at the reflex arc again. The stimulus that stimulates the receptor in the skin. The nerve impulse will travel along the sensory neurons, where the sensory neurons will transmit the information to the relay neurons in the spinal cord, followed by the motor neurons and to the effectors. There are two types of the reflex actions. First, the spinal reflexes, which are the reflexes that are controlled by the spinal cord. Examples like the withdrawals of the hand from the hot objects, or we call the withdrawal reflex. The knee-jerk reflex, which we will see later. Cranial reflex, which are controlled by the brain but occurs without a person's consciousness. Examples like pupil reflex and salivation. Let's look at the examples of spinal reflex, or we call the knee-jerk reflex. Examples like the knee-jerk reflex. First, we need a stimulus. In this case, the stimulus is when the tendon under the kneecap is tapped. Nerve impulses are sent to the spinal cord by sensory neurons. The information is then passed from the sensory neurons to the relay neurons in the spinal cord, then followed by the relay neurons to the motor neurons. And from there, the motor neuron sends the impulse to the muscles. The muscles contract and cause the lower leg to jerk. Cranial reflex, examples like the pupil reflex. In bright light, the eye pupils constricts to reduce the amount of the light entering the eye. In dim light, the eye pupil actually dilate to increase the amount of the light entering the eye. We will look into more on the cranial reflex in the next chapter when we learn about the structure of eye.